Hello, this is Bob Pierce, Tobacco and Hemp Specialist at the University of Kentucky. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about some planting considerations for field planting of hemp. One of the first things that you need to think about when planting hemp is what plant population are you shooting for? And that's going to vary depending upon what you're trying to grow. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, I wanted to talk about some of the methods that we use to talk about plant populations. Probably one of the most common that you'll hear is people talking about the number of plants per acre, or the plant population per acre. In order to determine this, we take the square foot per acre, which is 43,560 square feet, and divide that by the row width in feet multiplied by the plant spacing within the row, also in feet. So as an example, if we had 40-inch rows, we take 40 divided by 12 to put those two measurements into foot measurements, multiply those together, and then divide 43,560 by that result. So on a 40 by 40 inch spacing, we would be looking at just under 4,000 plants per acre. Plant populations can also be expressed in other ways as well, and sometimes you may hear people talk about either plants or seeds per foot. This is a mechanism or a method of communicating that is often used to check the calibration of the drill or planter to make sure that we are reaching the target population that we're trying to put out. So for an example, let's say we wanted to put out 150,000 seeds per acre and we're planting in 16-inch rows. So again, we take our 43,560 square feet per acre, in this case divided by the row width in feet, which is 16 divided by 12, and that would tell us that with 16-inch rows we have about 32,670 linear feet of row per acre. Taking our 150,000 seed population, dividing that by the row feet per acre, gives us that we need about 4.6 or somewhere between about 4 and 5 seeds per foot of row when we're planting. And so after running the planter for a bit, it's good to get back off and check and see what the output is to see if you're hitting that target output. Another common way of talking about plant populations or making our planting decisions is to talk about planting pounds. How many pounds of seed per acre are we putting out? This method is typically more common when we're talking about either grain or fiber production because we're putting out a lot more seed per acre typically. But is also a somewhat less precise method because there can be differences in the seed size, and so we can put out two different cultivars both at the same amount of pounds per acre, and the populations may be considerably different because of differences in the seed size and the number of seeds per pound. So now that we've talked a little bit about how to measure it, let's talk about some of the different ways that we grow hemp or different products that we would use hemp for and how that might impact our plant population considerations. So for fiber production, we want a very high plant population, as much as 400, 500,000 plants per acre potentially, because what we want to try to do is to encourage that plant to grow tall and slender, to give us a small stem diameter, to give us the best quality of fiber out of that. So typically for this application, we're going to be using a grain drill and drilling the seed into 7 to 8 inch wide rows. Typically the planting rate for this, currently we're looking at about 40 to 60 pounds of seed per acre. Although as seed quality improves and our planting methods improve, that may come down, and we may switch this to looking at number of seeds per acre instead of pounds per acre. But right now, we think that 40 to 60 pound per acre seed rate is reasonable. You would maybe go on the lower end of that if you had a seed with a high germination percentage, a little bit higher if you had a low germinating seed. For grain production, the planting method is going to be very similar, but we probably want about half of the population as we typically would for fiber, because we're trying to harvest the grain, and when it puts on that flower head and that seed at the top, we want to make sure that stem is going to be large enough, have a large enough diameter to support that and not lodge easily. So we're going to go a little wider spacing. Also typically going to be drilled, I would say probably more in a little bit wider row, maybe 16 inches, but we do see some grain production as well in narrow rows at 7 or 8 inches as well. Again, slightly lower rate, typically going to be planted at 20 to 30 pounds of seed per acre compared to the fiber. For floral production, things are generally quite different because we're dealing with high value either clones or feminized seed, because we want to try to achieve that all female plant population to maximize the production of female flowers and the production of the essential oils or cannabinoids that we're interested in from those female flowers. So typically the plant populations are quite a bit lower because of the value of the clones or the seed. And also the types of plants that are grown for floral tend to be more highly branched, so we need to give them space to spread out. Plant populations typically, from what I've seen, are in about the 12 to 3,600, maybe 4,000 plant per acre range for floral production. And again, because of the value of the seed and of the clones that are used, typically these are going to be transplanted to ensure good survival. So mention the transplanting. Next, I want to talk just a little bit about methods of planting when we're talking about hemp. So we can direct seed into the field, drilling with typical grain drill, often used for grain or fiber production when we're using what we might call common hemp seed. That is a mixture of both males and females, or all monoecious seeds. Typically with these, you're talking about a cost of anywhere from $2 to maybe $5-6 per pound, depending upon the source of the seed. When we're drilling like this, often we're going to use a lot more seed than we expect to have plants, and that is to account for the fact that we do expect to have some seedling death when we're direct seeding into the field. Right now, these seedling death rates seem to be fairly high, at least in our experience. But as we hopefully improve seed quality and planting methods, we'll be able to reduce that seedling death rate. Another way of direct seeding into the field is precision planting. Typically, this would be what would be used with the more higher value feminized seed, and these would be planted at some space apart. The concern that with this method now is that, even with feminized seed, there's still going to be some seedling loss or seedling death that's going to occur. And with the lower populations, if you have very much of this occur, you don't have a viable plant population, which is going to lead to more problems with weed control and certainly with the yield. So you need to be careful with this. Make sure that you've got a good quality seed and that you plan accordingly, that there may be some seed loss or seedling death that's going to occur in that. And then the other method which I mentioned is transplanting. And in the transplanting method, typically we're going to grow plants in a greenhouse until they're hardy enough to survive in the field environment on their own. And this is what's typically done with feminized seed or the rooted cuttings, or what you might hear called clones, that are taken from mother plants and then rooted and set out into the field. Because of the value of these, transplanting is the way to go, because we ensure that the plant is hardy enough to survive when it goes out into the field. So here's just some examples. This is a grain drill, direct drilling into a situation. Planting depth, we'll talk about in just a moment, can be very important. On this particular drill, you may be able to see these inner wheels, gauge wheels, that will help to establish the depth. Some drills have these wheels that you can set so that the blades can only penetrate a certain distance into the soil, and that can be very important for establishing hemp, is to get the depth correct. And then this is an example here of transplanting into the field. Here we have the plants, in this case clones or rooted cuttings, that are being planted out. You'll notice the water barrel on the transplanter here. Typically, when we're transplanting plants to the field, we give them a little shot of water as they're going into the field, and that helps to get them established during those critical early days when the root system is still limited to just what was on the root ball itself. That little extra shot of water will give them a chance to get going. Sometimes people will add a little fertilizer to that water. Generally, we find that's not necessary, but as long as you don't go overboard, it can help to give those plants a little bit of a boost to get started. Currently, there are no chemicals labeled for application in transplant water on hemp, but typically in other crops, we will occasionally apply some pesticides through the water as well to help that plant get established. So seed quality has been an issue when we talk about particularly about the direct seeding of the common seed, but even also with feminized seed. There's been some issues with variable quality, seeds not germinating as well as what we would expect. So germination percentages have been quite variable. This is a challenging crop for seed producers to grow because of it matures unevenly. It's very difficult for a seed producer to harvest at that right moment to get the most mature seeds that are most likely to be viable. And from what we've seen, even under proper storage conditions, the seed doesn't store well for long periods of time, and slowly over time that germination is going to go down. Our results in 2019 seem to be a little bit better, but we still have quite a range, as you can see, from in the lower 60s for some seed lots to as high as 93 to 96% germination for some other seed lots. With this industry still being fairly new, when you get seed, if you get seed from a reputable manufacturer, there should be a tag on there that shows that it's been germination tested, and it should give a percentage of germination, which you can go by. If that's not on there, you can do a simple germination test, take about 100 seeds or so, and put them on a damp paper towel, not overly wet, but just a damp paper towel, and set them in a cabinet at room temperature check them about every 24 hours or so. And after about 72 hours, you should be able to see the roots emerging from the seed. So then you can count the number of seeds that have a root emerging and get an idea of what the germination percentage or the live seed that's in that lot is. And then you can use that germination rate to adjust your seeding rate to what you need. Also, as you can see, there is some range of seed sizes. For example, this is a seed that's relatively small, so there's a lot more seeds per pound. If you're shooting for a specific plant population, you can adjust the pounds per acre of that seed based on the germination and the seed size relative to other size seeds. So that's one way we can kind of dial in those rates. Even after accounting for germination, and this is one of our research trials that we did, we accounted for the germination, planted everything at about the same rate of live seed per acre. Then we came back and counted plants a few weeks after transplanting, and we still found that a significant percentage of the live seed that we planted did not establish a viable plant. So these numbers show the percentage of live seed that was planted that actually emerged. And so we had one particular cultivar here, and whether that's a cultivar issue or a seed issue, this was also an older lot of seed as well. So it may not have had the vigor. And even though we had already corrected for the germination, we still saw only about 27% of the live seeds that were planted emerged. Even our best varieties, only about 60%, just under 60% of the live seed that was planted actually emerged and made a plant. So this is an area that we really need to work on in this industry, trying to make sure we improve our seed quality, have seeds that are higher vigor, and also refine our planting methods so that we get good emergence of the seed that we do put out. One of the keys to good emergence is planting depth. Right now, Our recommendations in Kentucky, in this area, are to plant approximately a 1/4 inch deep. The reason that we're doing this is because we want very quick emergence, and typically those plants will emerge in about 4 to 5 days if we have a little moisture there. And they get up quickly and can compete with the weeds. So as you can see here in one of our planting plots, you see in the narrow rows plants coming up. Again, these come up in about 4 to 5 days if they're planted shallow. But there's some problems with that shallow planting as well. That surface 1/4 inch obviously dries out very quickly. So if you plant into a dry soil and it stays dry for some time, that plant is not going to emerge. Birds can be a problem, coming in and actually eating the seeds that have been put out. Birds seem to really like hemp seed. And soil crusting, which I'll mention again here in just a moment, is also a concern with our planting. If we try to plant deeper, going a 1/2 inch or deeper, the plants are going to be slower to emerge, and they're going to establish slower, may have somewhat of a reduced population as well. And unfortunately, that's also going to make them less competitive with the weeds. So there's a balancing act between getting the good soil conditions and getting those plants up quickly to compete with weeds. This is an area that we are continuing to work on in terms of determining optimum planting depth under different types of planting scenarios. As I said, you do need some moisture to get the seeds up, but if you get a heavy rain immediately after transplanting, crusting can be a big issue. We've had the best success, most consistent success in establishing stands in tilled seed beds. We've been able to have some success in no-till, but still working on the methods to get that correct every time. But after you've tilled that seed bed, you want to kind of cultipack it or drag it to press it down a bit and firm that surface to ensure an even planting depth. Again, you need good soil moisture, but if you get a heavy rain and the soil crusts over, hemp is going to struggle to break through that crust. Hemp emerges and grows much like soybeans do. And so as it's trying to break through that crust, the stem can actually break off and cause a loss of plants due to them trying to break through that crust. So we need to work on some methods for reducing the crust. So those are a few things to think about, when we're planting hemp. And as far as, my number one take-home lesson for planting hemp in Kentucky, just realize that your optimum plant population depends on the product being produced and the cultivar that is being grown. Hope this information has been helpful to you. Certainly, if you have more questions, be sure to visit our hemp website. There are other videos on other aspects of hemp production that will be at that site, as well as other information on growing hemp in Kentucky. Thank you.